Feeling lost is one of the most misunderstood emotional states in the human experience, and yet it's also one of the most powerful. People think being lost means they're failing, that they're behind, that something inside them is broken or not enough. But the truth, the real truth, is that feeling lost is often the first undeniable sign that you've outgrown the version of yourself you've been living as. It's the internal signal that the life you've built, the patterns you've repeated, the choices you've been making, and the identity you've been carrying can no longer contain who you're becoming. There is a shift happening beneath the surface, and that shift is what creates the discomfort. You're not lost because you don't have a path. You're lost because the old path no longer matches your new potential. When you feel lost, it usually shows up quietly at first. A small sense of dissatisfaction. A moment where something that used to excite you suddenly feels empty. A routine that once felt comfortable begins to feel suffocating. You start asking questions you never used to ask. You start noticing things you overlooked before. Your mind becomes restless. Your heart becomes unsettled. And the world around you starts to feel slightly out of sync. This is the earliest whisper that the identity you've been living isn't aligned with the identity you're meant to step into next. And because there's no roadmap for becoming a new version of yourself, your mind labels the feeling as confusion. It labels it as lost. But it's not lost, it's evolution. The experience of outgrowing yourself is not clean or linear. It's messy. It's emotional. It's uncomfortable. Because growth requires leaving behind the familiar. And the familiar isn't just routines or habits. It's also your beliefs, your fears, your patterns of thinking, and even relationships or environments that no longer support who you're meant to become. Outgrowing your old identity means shedding a part of yourself. And that process can feel like standing in the middle of your life with no clear direction, no map, and no certainty. That's why people panic. That's why they feel overwhelmed. But what's actually happening internally is a restructuring of purpose. You're being called to realign. Most people live years, sometimes even decades, inside identities they've outgrown because they fear this exact feeling. They'd rather stay in a life that's too small for them than step into the unknown. They cling to the old because the old feels safe, even if it's suffocating. But the feeling of being lost intensifies the longer you avoid the shift. The more you ignore your internal signals, the louder they become. Eventually, the discomfort becomes impossible to ignore. That's the moment when people say, I don't know who I am anymore. But the truth is, you do know who you are. You just haven't given yourself permission to become that person yet. Feeling lost isn't an identity crisis. It's an identity expansion. It's your mind and spirit signaling that your current habits, beliefs, and environment are no longer sufficient for the next chapter. And that next chapter requires a new version of you. One with clearer standards, deeper self-awareness, stronger boundaries, and a more aligned direction. That's why feeling lost often happens right before a major breakthrough. There's always a dismantling before a rebuilding. There's always a moment of disorientation before clarity arrives. You're not spiraling. You're shedding. Think of it like a snake shedding its skin. Before the shedding happens, the skin becomes tight, irritating, restricting. The animal becomes agitated and restless, not because something is wrong, but because it can feel that growth is pressing against its limits. The skin is no longer big enough for what's inside. That is exactly what happens psychologically when you feel lost. Your old identity is too tight for your new potential. You're not malfunctioning. You're expanding. But here's the part most people overlook. Outgrowing your identity doesn't just mean stepping into something new. It also means stepping away from something old. And letting go of an old self can feel like loss. It can create a sense of loneliness, even if nothing external has changed. It can make you feel disconnected from the people around you because the standards, desires, and perspectives that shaped your previous identity no longer resonate in the same way. This emotional disconnection is not a sign that you're lost. It's a sign that you're transitioning. And transitions are rarely comfortable, but they are always meaningful. There's a psychological phenomenon behind this. The brain is wired for familiarity. It loves patterns. It loves predictability. Even negative or limiting patterns feel safer to the mind than stepping into uncertainty. That's why growth often triggers fear. Your mind isn't afraid of the future. It's afraid of abandoning the known. But the feeling of being lost forces you to confront the truth that staying where you are is no longer an option. When the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change, transformation becomes inevitable. Feeling lost is also one of the clearest indicators that something deeper is waking up inside you. It often means your values are shifting. What mattered to you before no longer satisfies you. What you once chased no longer feels meaningful. Success, relationships, routines, things you accepted without question suddenly feel misaligned. This doesn't mean you're confused. It means your internal compass is recalibrating. You're being guided toward a life that feels more authentic, more purposeful, more true to your deepest values. But transitions take time. Recalibration doesn't happen instantly. And that period of internal restructuring is what we call feeling lost. There's another powerful aspect. When you outgrow an old identity, your old patterns of thinking stop working. The strategies that used to give you results no longer motivate you. The goals you once pursued start to feel shallow. You sense that there's something more, something deeper, something calling you forward, even if you can't articulate it yet. That internal pull is purpose trying to break through. Purpose isn't discovered in clarity. Purpose is discovered in curiosity. Purpose is discovered in growth. Purpose is discovered in movement, and purpose is often born from the moment you admit that the old path isn't working anymore. The beauty of feeling lost is that it forces you to question everything. And questioning is the beginning of awareness. When you start asking why you're doing what you're doing, why you believe what you believe, why you choose what you choose, why you tolerate what you tolerate, that's the beginning of becoming conscious. That's the beginning of reclaiming your power. Most people drift through life because they've never questioned their identity. Feeling lost breaks that autopilot. It forces you to pause. It forces you to notice. It forces you to reflect. Reflection creates awareness. Awareness creates choice. And choice creates transformation. This state also reveals something profound. You cannot rise to a new level of life with the mindset that built the old one. When you outgrow your identity, it's not just your external life that needs to change. It's your inner world, your beliefs, your self-concept, your emotional patterns, your sense of what's possible. Feeling lost is the internal tension created when your future self begins calling you forward, but your mind is still anchored to your past self. That tension isn't chaos. It's alignment in progress. You feel lost because you are no longer willing to settle for the life you once accepted. You feel lost because the goals you used to chase don't inspire you anymore. You feel lost because the version of you that made past decisions is no longer the version standing here today. Your soul knows you're meant for more, and it refuses to let you stay small. That inner push, that inner restlessness is the greatest gift you can receive. It means you're alive. It means you're aware. It means change is already happening inside you, even if the outside hasn't caught up yet. Feeling lost does not mean you lack direction. It means you're standing on the edge of a new identity, a new chapter, a new level of life. It means the old ways no longer work, and the new ways are still forming, and that in-between space, uncomfortable as it is sacred. It's the birthplace of transformation. It's the space where you discover what truly matters to you. It's where you reconnect with the deeper layers of your purpose. It's where you strip away what no longer aligns so you can rebuild from a place of truth, of clarity, of strength, of intention. Clarity doesn't arrive in your life like a neatly wrapped package handed to you at the perfect moment. It emerges from facing the very parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Most people think they're lost because they lack a plan, or they haven't found their purpose, or life hasn't given them the opportunities they hoped for. But the real reason clarity feels distant is because they've spent so much time running from their own truth. When you run from your truth, you run from your clarity. And when you run from your clarity, you create confusion that didn't need to exist. Clarity begins the moment you stop distracting yourself from what's really going on inside you. The world is full of noise, expectations, comparisons, obligations, pressures, and the constant stream of information demanding your attention. Most people have never actually been alone with their own thoughts long enough to understand them. They've layered their minds with noise as a way to escape the deeper questions. So when life slows down or hits them with a challenge, or shifts in a direction they didn't expect, they suddenly feel overwhelmed, directionless, uncertain. But that uncertainty is not because they lack the answers. It's because they've never given themselves the silence required to hear those answers. When you stop running from yourself, something powerful happens. The chaos inside you begins to settle. The scattered thoughts begin to organize. The overwhelm begins to soften. And beneath all the noise, you start to hear something you've been ignoring for years. Your inner voice, your intuition, your truth. And that truth is always whispering the same thing. What you're doing isn't aligned anymore. What you're tolerating is draining you. What you've accepted is too small for who you're becoming. What you've avoided is exactly what you need to confront. But listening to that truth requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires stillness. And stillness is uncomfortable for people who've built their identity on staying busy, staying distracted, staying externally focused. Many people confuse distraction with progress. They stay active but not aligned, moving but not growing, doing but not evolving. They fill their days but they don't fill their lives. That's why clarity feels out of reach. They're chasing momentum instead of understanding. Clarity doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from alignment. And alignment begins by sitting with your uncomfortable emotions instead of trying to escape them. The emotions you avoid carry the information you need most. The fear you suppress holds the truth about what you want. The sadness you ignore carries the message about what you've lost or outgrown. The frustration you feel points directly to the parts of your life that need change. Emotion is not the enemy. Emotion is the messenger. But you cannot receive a message you refuse to open. Most people fear slowing down because they're afraid of what they'll find in the silence. They're afraid that if they stop running, the truth will catch up. They're afraid to face the stories they built to survive. They're afraid to admit what they truly want because it might require them to change their lives. But the moment you stop running, you reclaim your power. Because clarity doesn't require control. It requires acceptance. Acceptance of where you are. Acceptance of what you feel. Acceptance of what you've been avoiding. Acceptance of the truth beneath the surface. When you finally face yourself, the fog begins to lift. You begin to see patterns you weren't aware of before. You notice the beliefs that have been shaping your choices. You see the habits that are keeping you stuck. You realize the relationships that drain you, the environments that limit you, the standards that are too low for what you truly desire. This awareness isn't comfortable, but it's liberating. Because once you see the truth, you can no longer pretend you're powerless. Once you recognize the pattern, you can interrupt it. Once you admit what's wrong, you can choose what's right. Clarity is not found in the future, it's uncovered in the present. It comes from looking at your life as it is, not as you wish it were. It emerges from asking yourself questions you've been avoiding for years. What am I pretending not to know? What have I been tolerating that drains my energy? What do I truly want that I'm afraid to admit? What part of my life feels misaligned? What am I holding on to that's already over? What part of me is evolving that I haven't acknowledged? These questions don't confuse you. They free you. Because the truth is you already know. You just haven't stopped long enough to listen. You haven't trusted yourself enough to act. You haven't given your inner voice the authority it deserves. That inner voice is not confused. It's consistent. It's clear. It's honest. It has been speaking to you for a long time. You just drowned it out with the noise of the world. The moment you sit with yourself long enough to hear it, clarity emerges naturally. It doesn't require force. It doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require a 10-step plan. It requires presence. It requires honesty. It requires the willingness to sit with discomfort long enough for the truth to surface. There's a reason people gain clarity during quiet moments. Early mornings, late nights, long walks, time away from distractions. In stillness, your internal world has space to speak. In stillness, you can finally separate your true desires from the expectations placed upon you. In stillness, you reconnect with what matters. Clarity grows in the spaces where noise cannot survive. And yet, clarity isn't something that appears once and remains forever. You gain clarity in layers. You grow into new levels of awareness as you evolve. Each chapter of your life requires a deeper version of clarity. That's why people feel lost multiple times throughout life. It's not regression, it's evolution. It's the call for deeper alignment. And every time the process begins the same way, by stopping long enough to face yourself. When you stop running, you begin to heal. You begin to recognize which parts of your identity were built out of fear instead of truth. You notice which choices were based on survival, not purpose. You start to see how much of your life has been shaped by avoiding certain emotions rather than understanding them. And when you let yourself feel those emotions fully, without judgment, without resistance, you unlock a deeper level of clarity than you've ever experienced. Because clarity is not an intellectual concept. It's an emotional alignment. Clarity happens when your mind, heart, and actions stop contradicting each other. When you stop acting one way while feeling another. When you stop saying yes to things that you internally reject. When you stop suppressing the truth in order to maintain an identity that no longer fits. When you stop fighting your own intuition and finally let yourself follow what feels true, this alignment is what creates clarity that lasts, not temporary motivation, not fleeting excitement, but a grounded, unshakable understanding of your direction. And that understanding always begins internally before it reflects externally. If you stop running from yourself, you also begin to see that the answers you've been searching for were never outside of you. People look for clarity in podcasts, books, other people's opinions, signs from the universe, external achievements, but everything external can only point you inward. No one can give you clarity. They can guide you, inspire you, or challenge you. But clarity is a personal revelation. It arises when you see yourself clearly, without illusion, without fear, without denial. And the moment you see yourself clearly, you begin to reclaim your identity. You start making decisions from truth instead of fear. You begin choosing environments that nourish you instead of drain you. You set boundaries that protect your energy. You let go of things you've been holding on to for the wrong reasons. You stop living for approval and start living from alignment. And as you do, clarity strengthens. It becomes less fragile, less conditional, less dependent on circumstances. It becomes part of you. When you stop running, you return to yourself. And when you return to yourself, clarity becomes inevitable because the truth was always there waiting to be acknowledged.